Hi, Prof. Marwala, how are you?
I'm doing very well.
That's good. So, colleagues, it's 2 o'clock, so I think a very warm welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for joining our June VC reading group. Thank you so much, Prof. Marwala, as always, for leading us through these very engaging and interesting discussions. Today, we're going to be looking at David Epstein's book, Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. And one of the things I liked the most about this book was the idea that cultivating ineffectiveness can actually help you get forward in life. And Prof. Marwala, I thought that seeing as we're at the end of quite a challenging academic semester, this book with some of its ideas about taking the long road and being slightly ineffective was the most apt book for this time of the year. So without further introductions, I'm going to hand over to you, Prof. Marwala. Sorry, and before I do that, just a reminder to everybody, please do post your questions in the chat. And in the second half of our hour, Prof. Marwala will answer your questions. Thank you so much. Over to you, Prof. Marwala.
No, thank you very much, Maria, for that introduction. Today, obviously, I'm going to be reading from the book, Range. Funny enough, the reason why that I became interested in this book, Range, was because Bill Gates highly recommended it a few months ago. And I went and checked it out, and I really enjoyed it. But this idea of reading to our community, whether internal or external, is very, very important. And I have to thank Maria for organizing this. Out of the books that I have read, in fact, today, I have just published a new book, Leadership Lessons from Books I Have Read. You can pick it up at Exclusive Books. In fact, it has 50 books that I have read. So you have 52 chapters, including the introduction to and the conclusion. And these are books from the diaspora. Many books that I've read here, such as Heart of Darkness, Things Fall Apart, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, Beloved, Purple Hibiscus, Americana, We Need New Names, The Moneyball Body. So, so very, very interesting take in this book. And then the second section is on searching for the ideal polity. Some of the books I have not read here, books such as Plato's Republic, Aristotle's Politics, How to Win an Election by Cicero, The Social Contract. I think I read it here. The Age of Reason, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Darwin. Yeah, Dickens, which I also read here. Then the third section is on science, technology, and society. The famous South African book, The Soul of the White Ant, Guns, Gems, and Steel, Nudge, which I read here, Thinking Fast and Slow, which I also read here, and so on and so forth. And lastly, I talk about on leading nations. So it is very important that as we read, we must also write. I'm expecting many, many people here at the University of Johannesburg to actually start writing. Maria is also running the UJ Press, where we are expecting books so that we can be able to take our society forward. So coming back to the book Range, David Epstein's book Range is about the benefit of exploring different things before focusing on one particular specialty, rather than focusing on one specialty from the onset. He uses the example of Tiger Woods, who concentrated on one sport, golf, and consolidated on it. In contrast, to Tiger Woods is Roger Federer, who tried different sports before focusing on tennis. Both of them became legends in their respective sports. We are now living in the fourth industrial age, where it seems for the first time that generalists are increasingly becoming more critical, although we shall always require specialists. Now, where did this idea of specialists come from? Because if you were to go to many of the thinkers of the past, they were in many ways generalists. Let us think of Aristotle. Aristotle was a psychologist. He was an anthropologist. He was a physicist. He was a historian. He was a philosopher. He wrote in all, he was a legal scholar. He wrote in all these subjects. Another person that we tend to think of as a specialist is Newton. Of course, he excelled beyond measure in the field of physics. But what people don't know is that he had intellectual interest on theology. Of course, much of his ideas in theology are discredited, but nonetheless, he was a scholar of a general type. Where did the idea of specialization come from? The Industrial Revolution actually is responsible for specialization. And it stems from the book, which I believe it will be very beneficial for us to read at one stage, On the Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. And on the Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith actually says that division of labor and getting people to specialize on a particular task is actually much more effective than actually having somebody who is overlooking the entire production system. That would be a generalist. So that is where it comes from. For example, today, people like Elon Musk, for example, have demonstrated how being a generalist can be beneficial. On the one hand, Musk is the CEO of Tesla, whose business is about electric cars and solar energy. On the other hand, he is the CEO of space company, SpaceX, and we know what SpaceX is doing in the field of rocket science. And of course, we also know that he is also a huge investor of Neuralink, a company that is working on decoding information from our brains and uploading it on the computer. So the problems of the 21st century are multidisciplinary. And I will give you an example. Let us just think of a problem of climate change. On one hand, it requires physicists to be able to tell us what exactly is happening. On the other hand, it requires engineers who should be able to tell us what are sort of devices should we come up with so that we can deal with the issue of climate change. On the other hand, it requires sociologists who are going to obviously advise us how to construct society that is going to be responsible as far as climate is concerned. Therefore, problems such as these, such as climate change, which are predominant problems of the 21st century, are multidisciplinary in nature and very often involve many different disciplines to tackle. For example, a speech recognition system such as Siri requires, firstly, somebody who understands linguistics, language, something that you can only study in the Faculty of Humanities. But at the same time, it requires somebody who can program. It requires computer scientists, people who can be able to understand what object-oriented programming is all about, who can understand Java, who can understand Python. Those are languages. But it also requires somebody who can build systems that connects things that are not necessarily easily connectable. And of course, this requires engineers. In this example, speech must be connected to a computer program, and at the same time must have a good user computer interface so that those customers who go and buy those devices are actually served well. So, given all this, how do we proceed? And I have often talked about this many, many times. We have to proceed by offering what I call multidisciplinary curriculum. The idea of specializing later rather than earlier is even more relevant at universities. Universities in Europe tend to specialize much earlier than those in the US. When one arrives at university in England, one is fixed to a major, whereas in America, you are given a year in which to declare your major. For example, so the European curricula are thus more specialized than the curricula in the US. For example, the British, their last 2 years is called at A-levels. And I know quite a bit about A-levels because I actually studied for A-levels after my matric. Now, these last 2 years, in many instances, they take 3 courses. If you are going to go to engineering, physics, chemistry, and mathematics. If you are going to go to biology, to health, medical sciences, you take biology, physics, and mathematics. Specializing too early. And when they arrive at university, the specialization is even on a much bigger effort. So, whereas studying in the United States, when I was studying as an undergraduate student in mechanical engineering at Case Western Reserve University, I was actually expected to take 12 human and social sciences courses. I took 3 acting classes. So I understand the idea of preparing to go into the stage, that exercises of your speaking muscles, very, very important. The idea of performance, the idea of taking a character. And of course, when I was taking these courses, I acted on a course or on a play, My Children, My Africa, by Ethel Fugard. I was Tamimbikwana in that play. And then further than the 3 acting classes, I took 2 psychology classes, 1 history class, 1 philosophy class, and 5 economics classes. This undergraduate experience prepared me for the multidisciplinary research career that I chose. Early specialization in Europe explains why the continent has fallen behind in the digital economy when compared with the US. As a result, there are no European versions of Amazon, Facebook, or Twitter. Certainly not at that scale. Now, where can we learn which way to go, specialization or generalization? What does nature tell us? Somebody once said, nature is the best teacher. Learn from it. Let us look at the example of the swarming of birds. Suppose you spread a bird seed in a park full of pigeons. within a short space of time, most pigeons will be clamoring around the area where the seeds were dropped. The interesting questions are, number one, how do they know where the seeds have been dropped? Two, how do they communicate with one another? Two. Studies show that pigeons use two mechanisms to answer these questions. The first mechanism is that each pigeon relies on its neighbor. It looks at what its neighbor is doing and just try to emulate. This is called group knowledge. The second mechanism is for each pigeon to rely on itself, its wisdom. And this is called individual knowledge. Using these two mechanisms, two crucial decisions are made: exploitation and exploration. So if I am to go back to the two subjects of David Epstein's range, Tiger Woods and Roger Federer, we realize that Tiger Woods, who specialized too early, actually relied on the mechanism of exploitation in the regards to our pigeons. Whereas Roger Federer, who actually sampled many different sports and ultimately chose tennis, was doing both of them. Firstly, exploring by looking at all these different sports and trying to specialize on them. And then finally, liking one and exploiting that particular one in depth. Given the two options, I actually think Roger Federer's approach is the one that is much more useful for the era in which we find ourselves. Given group and individual knowledge, going back to pigeons, each pigeon decides whether to exploit or to explore, or to use a combination of exploitation and exploration. By using group and individual knowledge and exploitation and exploration, the swarm of pigeons ultimately finds the food source. In 1995, Kennedy and Eberhard used individual knowledge and exploitation and exploration to develop an artificial intelligence method called the particle swarm optimization. This method is used to solve many complex problems. For example, it has been successfully used to design buildings that use the least amount of material. It has been used for scheduling shortest distances between 2 points for electronic maps. It has been used for scheduling in aircraft routes. It has been used in the design of power line systems to ensure a secure supply of electricity. And of course, given the complexity of these mechanisms, you are able to even impose constraints. For example, when it is designing these buildings, you have to ensure that they are strong enough to meet all safety standards. So, another example of where this technology has been used is to control a population of drones within the military domain. What does swarm intelligence say about Epstein's debate between generality and specialization? It says that the most effective way of specialization is through exploration. It is much more effective to start off as a generalist and end up specializing. From a risk management perspective, specialization from the onset is not an effective strategy. What does biology tell us? In genetics, the population of species interacts through mating, and the cells of the individual members of the population mutate. The process of mating ensures crossover of genes and enforces diversity in the population. Diversity is actually necessary. It's a necessary attribute for the survival of species. Then, according to Darwin's theory of evolution, another very important book that we need to explore, reproduction reproduces features that are most adapted to the dynamics of the environment. Of course, many have misunderstood Darwin's theory to mean that it is about the survival of the fittest. In his own words, Darwin had the following to say, and I quote, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but it is the one most adaptable to change," close quote. From Darwin's theory of evolution, an AI algorithm called a genetic algorithm was developed and can solve optimization problems. This genetic algorithm has been used in many applications to design gas pipeline systems, antennas that are used to deliver information to our homes, and also to design aeroplanes. Should be noted that the genetic algorithm begins with a population of diverse individuals, and then through mutation, crossover, and reproduction, it converges to a particular solution. If the initial population is not diverse enough, the genetic algorithm converges onto a suboptimal solution. What is to be learned from the genetic algorithm? First, that early specialization, that is low diversity in choices that are available, is not effective for the attainment of the optimal solution or the optimal decision. Furthermore, more dynamic early exploration of the solution space leads to a more optimal solution. The idea of early exploration and later exploitation has also entered the world of ideas generation. In idea generation, it is usually recommended that one starts by brainstorming exploration before narrowing down the solution exploitation. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I read a book, which is the book that I am going to recommend for my next installment of reading. It's called Creativity, Inc., written by Ed Catmull, where he is talking about his journey from a PhD student at the University of Utah to ultimately finding a company called Pixar that has made many, many good movies, such as Toy Story, such as The Lion King, where they, for the first time, they were using computers to generate those animations. How has this principle of exploration before exploitation shaped my education? When I began high school, I did many subjects, such as general science, biology, and physical science, agricultural science, practical agriculture, mathematics, English, Afrikaans, and Venda. By the time I was in my last year of high school, I had narrowed these subjects to biology and physical science, mathematics, English, Afrikaans, and Venda. At universities, when I studied mechanical engineering for my undergraduate and my master's degree, and then studied for the doctorate in artificial intelligence, this has allowed me to be a researcher who has many diverse interests in social science, medicine, and engineering. Now, in conclusion, what are some of the lessons that we can draw from this book? What are lessons that we can use in order to tackle some of the pressing problems that we are facing as a society? Of course, the big lesson here is that in approaching any problem, start with the general exploration and then end up with the specific exploitation. I seem to remember somebody saying that an educated man and a woman is measured by how easily they can be able to move from the general to the specifics and from the specifics to the general. Thus, as we lead in our homes, workplaces, government, let us allow ourselves and those around us to explore different options before zooming in on a specific solution. And as a leader of a university, one of the most important cardinals of a university, a good university for that matter, is the idea of academic freedom. The idea of academic freedom has a utilitarian objective. It allows many, many ideas to flourish within our environment so that we can have many options to evaluate when we make decisions. And therefore, instead of being exploitative as a university, we have to be much, much more explorative in order for us to build a university that we can all be proud of. I thank you very much.
Prof. Marwala, thank you so much. We have a couple of questions already, but I'm going to start with a comment, which is industry maturity also matters. New industries make profit by integration, while mature industries can be modularized. I suppose integration remains, as you have indicated, that the 21st century problems are multidisciplinary. And the writer goes on to ask a question, is the approach still applicable in an emergency situation? I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to reframe my understanding of the question. If you want to have somebody who will be a firefighter, do they need to be generalists or do they need to be specialists? I mean, of course, you have to be specialist. You have to understand. You have to understand the whole process of evacuating people from a building. That is a very specialist job. Now, if the person who went and specialized in such a profession actually did not spend much time outside the environment, don't you think that somebody who understands how homes look like, different homes look like, who even understand different personalities of persons will actually do well? Even though the job actually looks very specialized, I still maintain that the most effective people are the people with broad enough experience, but at the same time have a deep enough knowledge of the specific task that they require. So in other words, if we are designing an emergency medicine program, we have an emergency medicine program here at the University of Johannesburg, do we zone in on the specifics and it's all that we teach, or we get our students to understand society, to understand people, to understand infrastructure, whether it is a hospital, whether it is a home, and in many ways by exposure. I think that is very, very important. I think we should do both. Thank you.
Apologies. So the next question is, for those of us who stick in the same field, is it possible to be a generalist and a specialist?
It is absolutely possible to be a generalist and a specialist at the same time. I mean, I think the example of Elon Musk is perhaps a good example, because he is a trained engineer, so he is specialized, applied physicist, which perhaps is more general than a particular. Maybe it's not a good example because he actually studied a degree in applied physics, and physics is much more general than, say, mechanical engineering. But nonetheless, I think it is quite possible. It's quite possible to actually have a fair representation of both, but there will be instances where you have to have deep specialists, the person who understands what material to use in a rocket, deep. But for somebody who is leading, and I suppose this is what Elon Musk is doing, he obviously has to have a fair representation of the general and be able to employ specialists to be able to tackle specific issues.
Prof. Marwala, that links perfectly to a question that's been posted. Do you think that we need more generalists in leadership, but still specialists focusing on the job?
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm one of the people who is a big critic of our political system, and the reason why I'm a big critic is that we have far too many career politicians. So these are people who only knows, they have specialized quite a great deal about how to work the crowd, how to how to rise up in a branch meeting, but they have not gone out there and work as businessmen or work as doctors or as nurses and so on and so forth. And I think specifically because of that, we miss many things simply because our leaders, they might actually understand things in their generalities, but they have no idea on how to handle specificities. And as a result, many mistakes are made, and all of us have to pay a price because of that,
Right, the next question is, what is the influence of the economy or society one finds themselves in? At times, emerging with a specialized qualification, like medicine or law or engineering, could be seen as more expedient to getting a job compared to beginning with a more broad education.
Yeah. No, I actually think that is not a question of either or. I'll give you an example. An American doctor, if you go and take just pick an American doctor, medical doctor, you wouldn't be able to guess what they've studied as part of their degrees. Some of them will have done a BA in music. Some of them will have done a degree in engineering. Of course, you know, the difference there is that you can't go to medical school until you have a degree. You know, you have to go to university for 4 years and study for the degree, and based on that, then you can go to medical school. You know, now the question is, are they any better than our doctors? You know, I think when it comes to that is why you see medical technology is emerging much more strongly in that part of the world, simply because people have a much diverse experience. So you can pursue that specialized medical degree or that specialized engineering degree from a generalist perspective. And that is why I always say that we need to introduce here in South Africa into our curriculum of engineering students a fair dose of human and social sciences. Not the ones that are constructed for engineers, but the ones where they can choose and they go and study them sitting alongside people who are actually studying those subjects as part of their majors. So we have to do both. So if we, obviously, this touches on the issue of curriculum reform. How do we reform our curriculum so that as we pursue a specialist role, we actually go through a generalist path? How do we create more federals, the federal approach, than a Tiger Woods approach? I think that is what we should actually be aiming for.
And our next question is, from my organization development background, how can one ensure that everyone is included, let's say in the decision-making in an organization? How do we bring in the specialist approach at the same time ensuring that everyone is included in whatever we do as an organization?
Well, I mean, I think diversity of teams, diversity of approaches is actually a very important aspect of organizations. It is very, very important, you know. Now, when you go to a bank and you have a team of people, specialists, who are deciding whether somebody gets a loan, a home loan or not, wouldn't it be beneficial if amongst the mix you have social workers and so on and so forth? It's just a question, you know. Of course, if we pursue that approach that I've been advocating for, of nurturing specialists via generalized training, then those people, those specialists will be sitting around the table, will actually have a respectable appreciation of sociology, society, and people to be able to make the correct decisions. So as we are leading in our organizations, we must have diverse teams. I will, for example, use my own leadership, my own leadership team here, the executive committee of the University of Johannesburg. That does not include the deans, because by their very nature, they are specialized. You are not going to have a dean of humanities who is an engineer or vice versa. You might have faculties that are more or less the same. Maybe you can get somebody from the Faculty of Science to be the dean of the Faculty of Health Sciences and vice versa. If you look here in my own team, I have a psychologist, Dr. Vukuza. I have a person from the health sciences, Professor Swart. I have a mathematician, Professor Kinta. I have an engineer, Professor Sorab. I have a lawyer, Professor Bedi. I have another psychologist, Professor Engineer Parek. You can see my bias towards psychology. I think it's a very enticing subject. And the reason for that is that the way teams like that tackle problems is actually much more interesting, especially if you give them the space to think and to think hard and to the confidence to bring their own disciplinary experience into decision making. Then you have a very exciting cocktail of answers. And I always say that University of Johannesburg always has answers that are not obvious, that are actually quite different from how others are tackling the offering of higher education. And if rankings are to go by, we have been very successful in that regard. Number 2 in terms of research output in the country, and number 1 in terms of impact, according to the Times Higher Education Impact ranking, not only in South Africa, but in the continent.
Right, thank you for that. The next question is, in Africa's case, where it is widely accepted that we are lagging behind, how do we balance the time between exploring and exploiting youngest population?
Well, we have to invest. We have to, I know the Americans managed to fit everything because they do 4 years. All their degrees are 4 years, not 3 years. Even though people will say, but what you get at the end of the day is equivalent to our honor. So there's no difference in our in the amount of time. One of the first things that we have to really inculcate in our minds as South African is that education is an investment, and investment requires huge sacrifices. It requires sacrifices of financial resources. It requires sacrifices of the nature of time that you have to put on those hours. There is no way you are going to go and learn theory of relativity by skimming through the notes for 5 minutes. It's just not possible. You'll have to put hours and hours and hours and hours. And our people must understand that education requires hard work. I mean, I spent quite a great deal of time in China, mainly in Asia. The fact of the matter is, when they tell you the amount of hours their school-going children are spending, it's crazy. I mean, they'll tell them, no, the child goes to school for 8 hours. But everybody knows that 8 hours is not enough for you to be good enough to go to university. So they have, in Japan, they call them juku schools. I don't know what they call them in China, but they spend additional 4 hours. So Chinese and Japanese kids and Korean kids are spending 12 hours engaged in academic exercise. And some people might say, but that is overdoing it. The fact of the matter is, investment into education is very expensive and taxing, both in terms of times and so on and so forth. Somebody wrote on on Twitter that he got all distinctions, and somebody replied that the Vice Chancellor of University of Johannesburg will love you. And he was right. I actually expect good performance of our students, and when they don't perform well, especially when resources are available for them to perform well, I actually think part of the reason is because they are not putting enough effort. They are not putting enough hours. And when I walk around and I see students just sitting down doing nothing, I'm like, but you are students. You have to be busy all the time. You can't just be lounging and not doing anything. Of course, people will say that I'm old style, but I think that is important for us to inculcate that into our culture.
Prof. Marwala, this picks up on an interesting idea that Epstein discusses in his book, and that's the idea of cultivating inefficiency. Could you talk a little bit more about what he's actually getting at with this idea of inefficiency? He, for example, says one of the best ways to learn is by failing a test. Could you unpack that a little bit more for us, particularly in what you've just said about spending the hours working and being dedicated?
Look, I think he exaggerates it a little bit. I expect success, but I'm also, and I will go back to the idea of evolution, the idea of swarm intelligence, that there is no learning without failure. And failure might mean you are an engineer and you are designing something, and your design just does not meet the required specifications, and you have to throw it away. The question is, if you have to throw away the design, was it really that fruitless? No, because you learn from it. And then there is another question that is very critical, that says that cum laude students are not necessarily the best lawyers in town. This is what I heard from one of my professors. So the cum laude students are not necessarily the best lawyers in town. In fact, the best lawyers in town are actually, not cum laude students. And then people can give you example of people who were good. They were solid students, but they were not cum laude students. And I think that talks more about conformity, the way we test our understanding of material. Probably somebody who conforms will probably do much better than somebody who will say, hey, but I'm interested to study those things. They are not in the syllabus. So I'm going to study a little bit of this and understand it, and then go and study those things that I want. So going back to the theme of this book, such a person, the cum laude students might tend to be exploiters rather than explorers. And explorers will encounter much more failure than exploiters. And ultimately, the industry requires both. For creativity, you need explorers. The person who, Thomas Edison once said that, before I found the correct way of making an electric bulb, I had 99 designs that failed. And of course, nobody remembers the 99 bulbs that failed. We all remember the one that succeeded, that we still use today.
So there's a question here following on what you've just been saying, Prof. Marwala. Could you explain more the difference between explorer and exploiter?
Well, the exploiter is a guy who wants to specialize. They want to know how to find the most effective way of designing an elevator as fast as possible, whereas the explorer is the one who will wander around and say, I mean, let us suppose I don't know what an elevator looks like. How would I design it? And then they will do what is called brainstorming. It's actually quite interesting how much many of us no longer brainstorm. I mean, when was the last time you brainstormed?
Well, I'm a great brainstormer, so
I'm very impressed.
Brainstorming on Monday.
Many of the people are no longer. I tell you, I can't remember where a place where I sat down in a meeting here at the University of Johannesburg, and there was an agenda item that says brainstorming. Just tell me ideas on how to improve what is going on at the university, and maybe that's what I should do next,
Yes, and you should come and chat to us in the library, because we've got these task teams, and that's exactly what they're about. They brainstorm. It's spend 20% of your time thinking out of the box.
Absolutely. We should do that. We should introduce that in Senate.
Yes. And that's how we've come up with all the new products that we've come up with. We're busy working on this digitization game.
So to answer the question, exploration is what Maria and her team are doing, and exploitation is what we have been doing at Senate, where it's an agenda. We move from one agenda to another. And it's a good example, isn't it?
It's a very good example, yeah.
When you go to Senate, you know what we do. There's not much exploration, yeah.
And so with us in the library, in our management team, we've been thinking, one of the things we've been brainstorming is how to have more explorative meetings, where you actually can think.
I like that.
Problems.
I like that.
Sort of thing.
And of course, there are places where you need to exploit, and I can understand why Senate has come to be like that, because that course needs to be approved. That new so it's almost all about approval of programs and so on and so forth. But I think we have introduced a good thing where we ask an academic to actually come and speak about what they are doing. We end our innocent, and the whole idea is to open the minds of our senators on something, especially people who are not from the discipline, because it's really for the people who are not from the discipline, if you think about it.
Exactly.
So that they can open their minds and be able to have a different perspective, and they can go to your work and say, but maybe I can apply this to my own domain, and that is the source of innovation.
Yeah, precisely. So, Prof. Marwala, that leads very neatly to the next question, which is, Prof. Marwala, do you think you need to specialize to understand things, how they work, and then be a generalist to solve problems?
Absolutely. I couldn't have put it better. I couldn't have put it better. That is absolutely correct. That is the right model, you specialize in order to be able to solve specific problems, and you generalize in order to solve much more diverse, complex problems. Complex in the sense that it requires you to think outside your domain of specialty.
Right. Prof. Marwala, I don't have any more questions. And so I'd like to ask you, is there an aspect of the book that you feel you didn't touch on and you would like to explore a little bit more with us in the last few minutes?
No, I think, that was the big idea that I picked from the book. I think that is the big theme in the book. And what I really enjoyed about this whole experience is that in many ways, we do not appreciate the role of sports. in building very, very good characters that are needed to build vibrant organizations. And in many ways, failure to nurture leadership in our communities is because we no longer have those joint activities like sports. I used to be a member of a soccer team, not a very good one, I must confess. And they will, each one, and you are young, you are 10, you are 11, and so on and so forth. You have a soccer team, which is a complex structure. There's at least 11 people because you need 11 people in the field. So it is 15, 16 people who are members of the club, and it is run completely by young people, not old people, by young people. And when I think about it now, I'm quite impressed, So we will have tasks such as, collecting money so that we can be able to go and buy a ball, and we'll do that, and we'll go to a shop, that was owned by, I think, the father of the CEO of PwC. We'll walk there and we buy this ball, and then somebody has to look after it. It can't get lost because it never had any spare, and then we do not necessarily have uniform, so you will encourage people to buy similar looking T-shirts, and if you are lucky, and we were lucky because one of our teammates was his father was working for AIG, the big insurance company, and they gave us AIG shirts, and our team ultimately was called AIG. Good advertisement for AIG, because I still remember it even from today. AIG is a big American insurance company, and then somebody will have to take ownership of that. You can't say everybody has to go with it because it gets lost. No, I can't see it anymore. Somebody takes ownership of that, make sure that it is the gear is washed, and then comes and give, and so on and so forth. And then obviously when you look at team building, coordination, why did we let those activities go? It was actually even better than a soccer team in school, because a soccer team in school, you have an organizer. One of the teachers will be organizing you, whereas that team will not. And then every now and then you will say, let's put, because we're going to go for the competition and so on and so forth. I think let's go back to those things. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Marwala, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. And we are looking forward to Creative Ink, which is going to be the next book. And we look forward to seeing you all next month. Stay well and be safe.
Thank you very much.